Hello, my name is Shannon Wilkinson and I will be your presenter for today. This presentation is on sensitivity analysis. More specifically, what is sensitivity analysis, the qualitative and quantitative steps of sensitivity analysis, and incorporating risk into capital budgeting analysis. Now, let's see what sensitivity analysis is. Sensitivity analysis helps decision makers see all the alternatives and choose the best decision that aligns with the company's financial goals and level of financial risk they are willing to take. Sensitivity analysis shows the magnitude of changes in outcomes, such as profitability, in response to changes in input assumptions. It helps to focus directly on the critical drivers that affect the outcome. It also helps to calculate the importance of an assumption. It is used to determine the value of an input variable that is necessary to produce a specific outcome. Sensitivity analysis involves recalculating the cost estimate with different quantitative values for selected input values or parameters in order to compare the results with the original estimate. Sensitivity analysis is used in capital budgeting to evaluate how sensitive a project's outcomes are to changes in key input variables. How will the net present value and internal rate of return change if the sales volume increases or decreases, or if the selling price increases? Next, we will look at the qualitative steps of sensitivity analysis. The first step is to identify critical input variables such as incremental sales, lost sales, cost of goods sold for incremental sales, advertising expense, new product management salaries and benefits, market research, capital required for new equipment, incremental maintenance expense, and discount factor. Critical input variables with the least confidence are incremental sales and lost sales. Lost sales are purchases that customers would make in the absence of a new product. The next step is to understand the business environment by analyzing the market trends, competition, and regulatory risk. Once you understand the business environment, it is time to consult stakeholders to gather input from finance, marketing, and operation teams. The last step is to assess scenario likelihoods by using expert judgment to weigh the likelihood of best case and worst case scenarios. Now that we know the qualitative steps, let's dive into the quantitative steps of sensitivity analysis. The first step is to identify key cost drivers, ground rules, and assumptions for sensitivity testing. The next step is to re-estimate the total cost, NPV, or net present value, and IRR, internal rate of return, by choosing one of the assumptions or cost drivers to vary between two set amounts. By examining each assumption or factor independently while holding all others constant, the cost estimator can evaluate the results to discover which assumptions or factors most influence the estimate. To determine what the key cost drivers are, a cost estimator needs to determine the percentage of total cost that each cost element represents. The major contributing variables with the highest percentage cost elements are the key cost drivers that should be varied in a sensitivity analysis. The third step is to document the results. You can use tables or graphs to show the results of each variable change. Repeat steps 2 and 3 until all factors identified in step 1 have been tested independently. Finally, evaluate the results to determine which drivers or assumptions affect the cost estimate. Now that we know the steps involved in the sensitivity analysis, let's look at incorporating risk into capital budgeting analysis. Capital budgeting analysis estimates the future cash flows of a project and compares them to the initial investment cost to determine if the project will generate an acceptable return. Evaluating risk in capital budgeting is important because it evaluates the potential risk on the financial outcomes of a project. Businesses need to know the risk involved in their decision making so the company can meet its financial goals. Businesses use sensitivity analysis to help determine the risk of a project. By changing the key cost variables one variable at a time, then recalculating the total cost of the investment, it can be used to see if an acceptable return or if the risk of taking on that investment is too high and not worth it. Risk-adjusted metrics can be used to determine if the project's expected return is worth the risk. It includes the risk-adjusted NPV and the AIRR, adjusted internal rate of return. NPV is the difference between the present value or cash inflow and the present value of cash outflows over a certain period of time. The risk-adjusted NPV adjusts the cash flows to reflect their certainty before discounting to help separate risk from time value of money. The AIRR adjusts cash flows or discount rates to account for the risk to provide a more conservative return estimate. Sensitivity analysis qualifies risk by showing which assumptions are important and will support better investment decisions. By a business finding high-risk elements, they can avoid high-risk investments that would decrease their financial health. Now let's review sensitivity analysis and risk and capital budgeting analysis. Sensitivity analysis determines how the cost estimate is affected by a change in assumption. Risk analysis is important to consider in capital budgeting analysis. Knowing the risk of a decision can help make the best financial decision so the company can meet their financial goals and know if the project cost is worth the risk. Continue to reevaluate assumptions throughout the project due to assumptions evolving over time. Here are the references listed that we will use for this presentation. Thank you for listening and have a good rest of your day.